Hi guys, welcome back to my channel, The Determined Gardener. It is almost winter and that means there's going to be lots of cooler weather outside. As much as I love hydrangeas, second to hydrangeas, I love our orchids. These are beautiful, beautiful indoor plants, and I'm going to show you how to make sure you keep them healthy and thriving during the winter. Let's get to it. This orchid that I'm holding in my hand is just one of the typical orchids you get from the big box store. One of the more important things you want to remember about taking care of orchids during the winter time is to make sure you put them in an area where there's cooler temperatures. You don't want to put orchids in a very humid spot where there's a lot of sunlight or it's just very hot during the day. But you want to avoid very cold temperatures. Just think about it this way. You put an orchid in a place where it's not too drafty, where it's comfortable. So if you're in a spot where you feel comfortable, the orchid most likely will also feel comfortable. So you don't want to put it in any drafty areas near windowsills where there's a lot of drafts, because that will cause the petals and the blooms to fall off. So find that sweet spot in your house where there's not too much heat, where there's not too much cold, where there's not a draft or the air conditioning is blasting or there's a huge heat source. You want to put it in a windowsill or an area or a desk stand where you're getting natural light, but the light is not directly hitting it. That sweet spot in my house is in the bay window, and this is where it gets a morning sun and afternoon shade. Now, these are beautiful plants and they're very strong, but they are susceptible to what's called bud blast during the winter. And that happens when you see these beautiful orchids at the big box stores. They're nicely covered in plastic and they're in a warm environment, and you take them out to your car. That is when they are most susceptible to bud blast. And you can see what it does. It actually shrivels up the buds and it dries it out, and then the buds fall off and they're no use to you. So you want to avoid bud blast as much as possible. The best thing to do if you are buying these orchids in a big box store, maybe a husband, boyfriend, or friend can park a little closer, and then you can actually get them in your car. Make sure it is on a neutral or comfortable temperature to avoid bud blast. What happens in bud blast is it gets from a warm temperature to a very cold temperature, and that is when bud blast occurs. You can see right there, that's a goner. Most likely that is not going to survive. And bud blast usually happens in these really small buds, but they can also occur in the bigger buds, and I'll show you what I mean. So if you go into the big box stores and you see stems or buds that look like this, you want to avoid them as much as possible, because that looks like bud blast. And you can see the difference, right? The stem is brown. This one is not as brown, but it's going to be, unfortunately, bud blast. This is more of an advanced stage. And you can see the difference between the buds, right? This is nice and green and healthy. It looks strong, right? Vibrant, as opposed to this. So if you see this in the store, you want to avoid it as much as possible. That is not buds that are going to bloom. Those are buds that are going to fall off in about 4 or 5 or even a week. So if you see that in the big box stores, you want to avoid them as much as possible. You can see right there, that's a goner. Most likely that is not going to survive. And bud blast usually happens in these really small buds, but they can also occur in the bigger buds, and I'll show you what I mean. Now you can see these are 2 buds. This one looks nice and healthy. The stem is nice and green. It's still plump, and you can see there's variation when it comes to the color. Now this one is starting to have bud blast. You know why? Because the stem looks a little translucent. Right here, you can see it's starting to get a little lighter and brown, and it's starting to shrivel up. Sometimes you can save these buds, but when it's like this, most likely it's probably going to come off. It's only going to be a couple of days until this buds falls off. What you can do is, again, move it to a different spot. But if it starts to look like this, unfortunately, there's really not much you can do. I mean, a little bit of bud blast is normal. Don't panic when you get that. It's not that you're doing anything wrong. Sometimes the orchid just does it on its own. I don't know why. But if you see a lot of buds on your orchids, like so right here, right? This looks nice and green. Really don't worry yourself too much about it, because it is going to happen sometimes. So if you're going to the big box stores and you see stems or buds that look like this, you want to avoid them as much as possible, because that looks like bud blast. And you can see the difference, right? The stem is brown. This one is not as brown, but it's going to be, unfortunately, bud blast. This is more of an advanced stage. And you can see the difference between the buds, right? This is nice and green and healthy. It looks strong, right? Vibrant, as opposed to this. So if you see this in the store, you want to avoid it as much as possible. That is not buds that are going to bloom. Those are buds that are going to fall off in about 4, 5, or even a week. So if you see that in the big box stores, you want to avoid them as much as possible. Bud blast can also occur when there is not enough water, when you're not watering your orchids enough. But we are going to get to the topic of watering during the winter months, and I have some really great tips for you. And during the winter, it's recommended that you reduce the watering for these orchids. During the summer, of course, orchids need much more water, but during the winter, they need much, much less. And you want to do that because you don't want to rot these roots. And these roots can easily get rotten out if you put too much water. So just think about it. It's cooler temperatures and you're watering once a week. That is definitely a no-no. During the winter, you want to actually make the medium dry out. And when I say medium, I'm going to show you exactly what I'm talking about. See right here, the medium is dry. You want to make sure this is all dry out first. And then you put the water in here and you drop the pot in here and you wait for about 30 minutes. Empty out the water, make sure there's no standing water inside, and then pop in your orchid. You want to do this during the winter, maybe once a month. Really, only once a month. It works for me, and so far, it's been very successful. What I have found is when I water more, the stems start to droop, the leaves start to droop. The orchid is not happy. So you really want to water once a month during the winter. Number one, to keep your orchid happy. And number two, to prevent root rot. Put the spray bottle down. Put the spray bottle down. You don't want to spray your orchids during the winter. You don't want to be misting it around because the air is moist. It doesn't evaporate. So what you're doing is just causing condensation on the leaves. You're going to cause these orchids to be unhappy. So put the spray water bottle down. Don't spray during the winter. Wait until it's warmer, preferably during the summer. So guys, I wanted to show you another tip of what's happening with this orchid. This is why you really want to avoid drafts. You see this area right here, how it's much darker than this? That is because I had it near a windowsill where it was very drafty, and you can see the difference in the color. You can see it's turning brown, whereas opposed to this is lighter. So when this is happening, you want to really move your orchid to a nicer and cooler, warmer area. The best place is to put them near a windowsill, but you want to make sure that windowsill is insulated and there's no cold air coming in, because this is what's going to happen right here. Another way to tell that your orchid is in a happy spot, if they have very stiff leaves. You can see these leaves are standing up and this orchid is very happy. If the leaves seem to be crinkly or they're droopy, then that means that you have to move them to a better spot that is cooler but not too hot. During the winter months, you want to avoid using any of these potting mix to repot your orchid. And that's because you don't want to disturb the roots. Right now, they're in a dormant stage. They're relaxing. They're getting ready for spring to give you those beautiful blooms. And the thing you don't want to do is to disturb their roots, or even worse, damage their roots. So kind of really lay off of repotting your orchids during the winter months. Wait until it's warmer, and it's also advisable that you don't repot often. You want to repot maybe a couple of every years, maybe 2 to 3 years, because the orchid, if there's nothing wrong with your orchid, then you should just leave it alone. The only time you should really repot your orchid is when it's really necessary, when it's close to dying or the roots are really soggy and just mushy. That's the only time you really should repot your orchid. Otherwise, if it's thriving or it looks okay, just leave it alone and let it do its thing. And guys, this next tip seems to be a no-brainer, but I have to say it anyway. You want to avoid at all costs putting these plants outside during the cold weather. You don't want to put them outside. You want to actually keep them indoors at all times. Putting them outside in the extreme heat or in the extreme cold will kill them. I should know. I've done that before. So guys, I had a blast making this video. I hope the tips that I gave you will help you keep your orchids thriving during the winter months. If you had any good, useful information from this video, please can you do me a favor and give it a thumbs up? Share it with your family or friends or anyone you know that recently got a new orchid or may be struggling to keep it alive. These are really helpful tips that I have done over the years that keeps my orchids nice, thriving, and happy. So again, thank you so much for joining me here on my channel, The Determined Gardener. Don't forget to like this video, share it with your family, friends, and garden pals. I will be doing several orchid videos throughout the winter months showing you the do's and don'ts on how to keep your orchid healthy throughout the months. Until next time, bye-bye everyone. See you in the next video.